welcome to today's video where we're going to be going over exponential moving averages, otherwise known as EMAs. We'll get right into things. I mean, pretty straightforward. The EMAs are exactly what you're seeing on my screen right here. This little blue line going through and this orange line. These are the specific EMAs that I use. And I've noticed over the past few years of trading that a lot of experienced traders will either really love using EMAs or they really won't like using them, right? There's really no in between. But over the past 2 or 3 years is when I've really started using EMAs, and I really love using them as part of my analysis. So I'm just going to give you my perspective, the specific 2 EMAs that I use, how I use them to analyze my charts, and I'll leave it up to you guys if you want to incorporate that into your trading strategy or not. What I'll do is I'm just going to delete them off my chart and go through them one by one because I have the 2 different EMAs and they both kind of work differently, but also in conjunction, right? They work together. But let's just clear these off of here. So if you're on TradingView and you're going to add some new EMAs to your chart, all you really got to do is come up to the top here. You'll see this F icon, click that, and moving average exponential is the one we're looking for, right? That's what the E is in EMA. So just go to the settings of it. For the first one that I use, I put the length down to 8 and I leave everything else the same. That's that, right? I have my color as like a nice little blue. So it's pretty easy to understand for this 8 EMA. The way that I use this blue EMA is as pretty much a dynamic trend line, right? When price breaches below the blue, we're entering that bearish territory, right? And we begin to use it as a dynamic trend line moving downwards, right? When price breaches back above the 8 EMA, the blue line, it begins to use it as that upwards trend line, or a dynamic support and resistance, right? It breaches back below, begins to use it as that resistance, right? It's super easy to understand, right? When price is above the 8 EMA, we're in that bullish territory. It's kind of using it as that dynamic trend line going up. Super straightforward, super easy to understand. Now let's add in the other one because like I was saying, they kind of work differently, but they go hand in hand and I use them hand in hand. So my second EMA, I have it as this nice orange color. The length, I put this up to 14 and then I put the offset to 1 and that just shifts it over a little bit where I like it. Boom. So now I'm not just looking for price to breach below or above the 8 EMA, which is the blue one. I'm also looking for the EMAs themselves to cross either way, right? When we're looking for buys, I want price to break above the blue EMA, but I also want the blue EMA to cross above the orange to the upside, which as we know is the 8 EMA crossing above the 14. Right? When we're looking for sells, we want price to breach below the 8 EMA and have the 8 EMA cross below the 14, which would be the blue crossing below the orange. So I've got a little set of rules here that I pretty much use for my EMAs. Like I said, it's really straightforward and easy to follow. Once you get it, it's super easy. So just like I was saying, let's actually just put in here, this would be for sells, not seals, and this would be for buys, right? When we're looking for sells, when the candle, aka price, breaks below the 8 EMA, which is the blue one, and the 8 EMA crosses below the orange, which is the 14, that means we're in bearish territory, looking for those sells. For the buys, right, on the contrary, when the candles break above the 8 EMA, which is the blue, and the 8 EMA breaks above the 14, right, they cross the upside, you're in bullish territory. So let's just go through and I'll show you guys some examples of how effective this can actually be. Right here, for example, price breaches above the blue EMA crosses above the orange, and we start entering that bullish territory, moving to the upside. Same thing happened here for a shorter period of time, but it was still there. Price breached below the 8 EMA. EMAs crossed to the downside. We entered that slight bit of bearish momentum to the downside before that reversal that we just talked about. Same thing right here. Price breaches above the 8 EMA. The EMAs cross to the upside, and we enter that bullish momentum over here, right? Price is above the ADMA, and then we get the cross to the downside, breaks below the blue, and then the blue breaks below the orange. Tells us that we're in that bearish territory and we're looking for those sells. It then begins to use the 8 as that dynamic support and resistance. So overall, you always want to be using the blue EMA, which is your 8, as that dynamic support and resistance, right? You always know that when you're in a bullish market, it's going to be using that as retracements, bouncing as it follows, and vice versa. When you're in a bearish market, it's going to be doing the same thing, using it as that resistance as it moves down. So you always want to use the 8 as that dynamic trend line. But when you're looking for those reversals, when you're looking for a shift in momentum where the market wants to move to, that's when you're going to use the 14 and look for the crosses as well, right? You don't just want price to break below the 8, which is the blue, but you want the EMAs themselves to cross. So always be looking for price to break above or below the EMA and the EMAs themselves to cross. It's always going to happen. If we jump to another pair here, USD JPY, I've got the exact same EMAs on here as you'll see. Here would have been a nice, beautiful setup. Now keep in mind, this is just based off the EMAs, and you would never just use these EMAs on their own. You'd always use them with other aspects of technical analysis, but I'm just showing you how effective this can actually be for recognizing those trend shifts. Right here, perfect example. Price breached below the ADMA, and the ADMA crossed down below the 14 EMA. We entered that bearish momentum for those sells, and we began to use the blue as that dynamic support and resistance, that dynamic trend line to the downside. Right? And the momentum didn't shift. The momentum didn't shift until we crossed back up. Right? Price crossed back up above the 8, and the 8 crossed back up above the 14. Even if it was just temporary, it still occurred, right? Nice clean setup right here. Beautiful. We're in this strong downtrend, strong bearish momentum over here coming down. Reach our lows, and as soon as we cross back above our ADMA, EMAs cross back to the upside, we enter that bullish momentum. Right? Beautiful. So let's jump back over to Euro USD. I have just one more point I want to make on this. Kind of the cherry on top, the little extra nugget that's going to change the game, that secret sauce you guys are looking for, is that the best setups are when both happen at the exact same time. And when I say both, all I mean is price breaking below the EMA and the EMAs crossing, right? When both of those happen pretty much at the exact same time, those are always going to be much better setups than if they're a few candles apart. Let me find an example here. Actually, right here, this is a perfect example of something you wouldn't want as much, right? This wouldn't be as favorable of a setup because the EMAs price broke below the ADMA about 3 or 4 candles before the EMAs actually crossed, right? So that wouldn't be as good of a setup. Whereas, let's look here, right here. If we highlight that, this would have been a little bit of a cleaner setup, right? Because price broke above the EMA, right? Price broke above the blue EMA, and the EMAs actually crossed either that candle or the one right after, right? So the cross of the EMAs and price breaching above are happening at pretty much the exact same time, right? Those are always going to be the setups that you guys will favor and want to look for more than if they were to happen more spread out. So that's pretty much the EMA strategy that I kind of follow and I kind of use. It can be used on literally any single pair. Obviously, just like any other technical analysis component, the higher time frames are going to be stronger, right? Reversals with the EMAs on the daily are obviously going to be much stronger than if it was on the hourly, but it's always the same thing. You want price to breach above the blue EMA and the EMAs to cross to the upside to enter that bullish momentum. It's always occurring. Nice clean setup right here. Came down, entered consolidation. We were fiddling around with that ADMA. Finally breached above. The blue EMA crossed above the 14 and we entered that bullish momentum. Began to use the ADMA as that support until we cross back to the downside. Hope that makes sense to you guys. EMA is simplified. We'll be back for some more videos. See you guys next time.